I'd like to start by thanking the Honolulu Museum of Art for this invitation and for generously hosting this talk. I'd also like to thank my dear friends at the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art. Thank you for your friendship and your support. Microphone closer. This is good?
Yes.
Okay. Did you hear the thank yous though? Okay, good. Islamic calligraphy and design in contemporary art. Let's start by talking about Islamic calligraphy in its traditional setting. That would help form a clearer understanding of its contemporary definition. Calligraphy is the center pillar of Islamic arts. Islam as a religion is built upon the spiritual, the moral, the social, and very much so the linguistic strength of the written word of the Quran. So it's no wonder that glorifying the visual representation of the written word became the center focus of the creative culture of Islam. In other words, calligraphy was an attempt to heighten the visual effect of the written word in effort for it to ascend and meet the spiritual content of the Quran. As the Islamic Empire grew and flourished, so did the many forms and styles of calligraphy. Each influenced by the cultural and creative nuances of the regions where it actually expanded and grew. Regardless of the many styles of calligraphy, there's a cardinal rule that governs all forms of traditional Islamic calligraphy. It must have a literal meaning. Either passages from the Quran or the Bible, quotes by the prophets, disciples, followers, or verses of poetry, or instructions, and so on and so forth. No matter how ornate, involved, or complex it looks, it must encompass a literal meaning and originate from an identifiable passage. This is a good example. It's a detail of the small mihrab or prayer niche. A mihrab is a prayer niche in Islam at Shangri-La. As complex and intertwined as it looks, one can, with difficulty I might add, decipher which verse of the Quran it belongs to. Calligraphy became included in most applications. You find it in furniture, textiles, earth, glass, and metalware. But mostly we find it in architecture. Calligraphy adorns some of the finest examples of Islamic architecture in the world. The Mughal Taj Mahal, the Blue Mosque in Turkey, the Alhambra Palace in Spain, the Grand Mosque in Esfahan, Iran, and there are numerous more glowing examples. This is, I heard somebody say, wow, yes. This is my favorite example of calligraphy in an architectural feature at Shangri-La. So you can actually go and see this. There are 3 medallions that adorn the center of this archway. The upper medallion reads, God is high and above all heights. God is high and above all heights. The middle medallion reads, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, which is a blessing that all Muslims use before embarking on most activities, from the very mundane, such as preparing to eat, to the sacred, such as preparing to pray. The lowest medallion, or the closest to the viewer, is my favorite. And it reads, and I loosely translate, we have opened all pathways for you. In other words, there are no obstacles ahead of you in life. That's if you want to interpret it in a larger metaphorical context. These medallions are sort of a dialogue with the viewer. They're almost blessing us as we are about to cross the threshold from one designated area into another. If the beautiful geometric mosaic pattern on this archway makes it shimmer, then the 3 medallions gives it a personality and a voice, in my opinion. An encouraging, protective, and positive voice. And that's why I like it so much. This work is by calligrapher Muhammad Zakaria. It's part of the current Shangri-La exhibit here at the Honolulu Museum of Art. Muhammad is an example of a large school of contemporary calligraphers who are keeping alive the rules and traditions of Islamic calligraphy. However, the list of contemporary artists I chose for us this afternoon are those who challenge the rules and regulations of traditional calligraphy and use it as a vehicle for their individual creative expression. This work is by Pooran Jinchi, an Iranian artist. Calligraphy is central to her work. I personally identify with Pooran. She's a dear friend, but also we share similar academic backgrounds. We both studied as engineers. I think that gives us a more analytical and investigative approach to the creative process. This work is from a series titled the Owl series. The overall shape is reminiscent of a crossword puzzle. She uses fragments of Persian-style calligraphy called nastaliq. Nastaliq is the best-known form of Persian calligraphy, and it literally translates to hanging copy. Pooran is a master at breaking down calligraphy to bare minimum, yet somehow she preserves its essence and its beauty. This is another work by Pooran from a series called Farough. Like the previous example, she uses nastaliq calligraphy. Unlike the previous example, she piles up the calligraphic fragments to create a mass of abstraction. The result, in my opinion, is of dynamism and movement. These 2 panels are by a young Tunisian urban artist named Elseed. Elseed uses calligraphy with the context of graffiti, within the context of graffiti. He works with different sizes from the small to the very large scale, such as building facades. He told me that he uses the shape and rhythm of calligraphic Arabic letters, but not any actual letter, rather lines inspired by letter. He adopted the look of Arabic calligraphy as his personal tag. The essence of his work is the beauty of the forms themselves and not an expression of the written word. This work is by a Korean artist and calligrapher. He goes by the name Rostarr, R-O-S-T-A-R-R, R-O-S-T-A-R-R. He's a great example of an artist who's truly only influenced by the look and feel of Islamic calligraphy, without any attachment to the language or the heritage itself. His calligraphic creations are beautiful and energetic, in my opinion. This work is by one of Iran's modernist greats. His name is Pavriz Tanavuli. This is his signature H work. The work is titled H, which refers to the letter Ha or H in Arabic, Farsi, and the letter Ch or CH. By the way, Tanavuli is having a retrospective of his life's work at the Davis Museum right now in Boston. It's curated by Shiva Balagi and Lisa Fishman and Ruth Shapiro. It's his first in the United States. This work is by Iraqi calligrapher and artist Sabah Arbili. It's a colossal sculpture in Doha, Qatar. The work is a pileup of fragments of broken up words that are derived from a traditional calligraphic block that is derived from a traditional poem. This work is by yours truly. From a series titled I Am Baghdad, you can see the actual work here at the museum as part of the current Shangri-La exhibit. The series was created as a reaction to the invasion of Iraq and then continued to grow as a documentation of the emotions and feelings of the Iraqi people. Here, the seemingly traditional-looking calligraphy is meant to communicate only emotion and not an actual literal message. This is a 2014 second installment of that same series. The topic of this specific installment is the conflict between the Shiite and Sunni sect that boiled over to a crescendo after the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Like the previous I Am Baghdad work, the illegible calligraphic pattern is meant to reflect emotion, specifically the chaos resulting from the sectarian conflict. However, unlike the previous example, the source of this calligraphic pattern is a mixture of 3 or more names that were randomly selected from a list of names of the early founders of Islam, who are also referenced today in the division of the 2 main sects. So the resulting pattern may be illegible, but the source of the many calligraphic components is very much legible. Another series by yours truly. This series is inspired by a traditional art of the calligram. And a calligram is when words are arranged in a way that creates a visual image, or when calligraphy is arranged in a way that creates a visual image. Literally, calligraphy plus diagram equals calligram. Here, the written word assumes the shape of a sword or a dagger. The theme of the series is the power of words and its effect when used in positive or negative context. This is another example of calligrams. This work is from 2014 series titled Miriam. Calligraphic blocks assume the shape of ruffles and cuffs. I experimented with the placement, context, and usage of traditional calligraphic block. In other words, all calligraphic elements in this work are derived from literal sources, either from the Quran or poetry. Also, I adhere to the traditional style of calligraphy. Here it's the Kufic style, What's incongruous is how calligraphy is placed and in what context. The work itself is a riff on Western old masters, specifically that of Hans Holbein's portrait of Anne of Cleves. The work is commentary on the westernization of contemporary Middle Eastern culture. Here, the lines between calligraphy and design are blended, which brings me to the role and importance of Islamic design, which in many cases went hand in hand with calligraphy, especially when used in architecture, such as the Shangri-La archway example we saw earlier. This is a detail of the stenciled ceiling at the Playhouse in Shangri-La. In Richard's Ford book, Elements of Architecture, he wrote, and I quote, "In the first instance, Islamic architecture was functional. Facades were on the whole plain, in line with the teaching of the Quran, which forbade outward expression of ostentation. But the full imagination of Arab architects was released upon the interiors of palaces and houses. Through intense ornamentation, they kept spaces in constant movement and manipulated the eye as rhythm affects the ear in poetry, until the senses were lulled through the endless repetitions of pattern into a state of calm hypnosis. What we know of Islamic design is the floral patterns and the geometric patterns called arabesque. Regardless of the specific style and form, the art of Islamic pattern and design depended on symmetry, repetition, and rhythm. Symmetry, repetition, and rhythm. The very roots of Islamic pattern were influenced by early Roman, Eastern Christian, Byzantium, Persian art, Indian, Chinese, and the cultural exchange of the Silk Road caravan route. Each area of the Islamic world went on to create their own forms of patterns and designs, yet sharing common elements under the universal canopy of Islamic design. This is a detail of the Moroccan door in the reception room at Shangri-La, a good example of the famous geometric star pattern design from Morocco. This work is by French-Moroccan, New York-based artist Yasmina Alawi. The work is titled Zilij, inspired by the 7 stages of hell as mentioned in Islam. As we zoom in, we will see that she used the geometric star-shaped pattern in its traditional repetitive and symmetrical form for a maximum abstract effect. Yasmina calls it simplexity, a notion that simplicity and complexity can coexist. Inspired by culture, religion, and identity, I find this work both personal and hauntingly beautiful. This work is by Egyptian artist Shirin Gurgis. Shirin uses Islamic design in her abstract creations. She calls it the politics of decoration. The juxtaposition between the seemingly spontaneous water-driven color spaces and the controlled hand-cut geometric pattern creates an effect of both contrast and of harmony. This work is by Iraqi artist, New York-based Dina Al-Adib. It's a conceptualist work from an ongoing series that originated as a reaction to the bombing of one of Baghdad's historical areas, Al-Mutanabbi Street, in 2007. Dina overlaid transparency of architectural diagrams of ancient Baghdad and some of its important buildings. There are 2 or 3, or sometimes 4 transparency on top of each other. And she also superimposed poem excerpts by one of Iraq's most famous poets, Al-Mutanabbi. Al-Mutanabbi is an 11th century poet known for his sharp wit and cynical yet very captivating poems. To me, this work is a commentary on what was and what has become. As an Iraqi, I am very moved by the sad and ironic notes in this work. This work is by a dear friend, Lebanese-American, Hawaii-based artist who's with us this afternoon, Reem Bassous. Here, Islamic patterns are juxtaposed with familiar Christian motifs, icons, and designs that gives insight to the political situation and sectarian strife in Lebanon. Reem overlays religious symbols with geometric maze-like patterns The pattern's reminiscent of Kufic-style calligraphy. The maze symbolizes, at least to me, a metaphorical street map where neighborhoods of a city are bombed. The usage of graphite, soot-like washed and burnt surfaces anchors the reality of the volatile situation of that very beautiful yet restless country. Among the most celebrated schools of design are those of carpet weaving. Most noted examples are from Persia, Turkey, and India. Each geographical area or town is known for its specific pattern and distinct dyes, such as the Kashan, Tabriz, and Esfahan school of carpet weaving in Iran, or Kashmir, Lahore in India, like this example of the octagonal carpet, part of the Doris Duke Foundation of Islamic Art collection. This work is by a young Azerbaijani artist called Faik Ahmed. He combines the traditional age-old rug weaving and design art with digital manipulation to twist and morph both shape and pattern of the finished piece, a visual commentary on past and present. This work is by Iranian artist Sadegh Terefkhan. His medium is photography. In his work, he used visual references of design, calligraphy, illuminated manuscripts, and miniatures to enhance and support his culturally driven themes. Sadly, Sadegh is no longer with us. He passed away at a young age. I believe his creative legacy will live on for many generations to come. On a personal note, he was one of the nicest people we can meet. This is his own image in the both the upper and lower part of the work. This work is by Iranian artist Hediye Shafei. Hediye writes the word ishq, which means passion in both Farsi and Arabic. In these rolls of paper, and they're yay thick, and they sit in these frames, and if you unroll them, you will see the words written. Sometimes she prints them digitally, and sometimes she writes them with a stylus or a pen. So my commentary on Hediye's work is, the work is both solid and fragile, contemporary, but strongly relates to the age-old art of Islamic design, because when I asked her to comment, she said repetition is essential to the work. And that's that part of the traditional Islamic art of design, which is to continue to repeat the same element over and over again to give you an overall hypnotic spiritual experience. This work is another example by Puran Jinchi. The series is called Dawn, Noon, and Night. Dawn, Noon, and Night. Here, Puran uses calligraphic medallions derived from the rubbing of a prayer stone, which is known in Shiite Iran. And she employs repetition and symmetry to create an overall mandala design pattern that encompasses commentary on spirituality. This work by Iranian artist Munir Farman Farmayan, the mirror fragment creation has a rather retro look. However, growing up in the region, geometric mosaic mirror fragment installations are a familiar sight in the interiors of many mosques and holy shrines. Her work is inspired by tradition, but she translates it into her own form of expression. This image is my cell phone image of the jolly old screen at the entrance hall at Shangri-La. Screens like these can be found all over the Islamic world and include different patterns of design, varying styles and different names, but with a similar purpose as a modesty screen, to cover doors, windows, pathways, basically to enable the looker to look out without being seen from the outside. In Iraq, we call them shanashil, or hanging windows. In Egypt, they're called mashrabiyas. In India, in Mughal India, they're called jalis, like this Mughal jali from the newly opened Mughal wing at Shangri-La. This work is a contemporary interpretation by German-Egyptian artist Suzanne Hofuna. She inserts quotes and sayings in her traditionally referenced screens. This is another example from the Miriam series we saw earlier. Here I use the very same Shangri-La Jali as the backdrop for this work, a traditional design pattern anchoring the seemingly Western work in an Islamic or Middle Eastern setting. This work is by Moroccan artist Hassan Hajjaj. I see this work as a commentary on today's Moroccan culture and also the influence of Western culture on the Middle East today. He uses patterns that are loosely inspired from Islamic design as his cultural anchors. This work is by another Moroccan artist, Lala As-Sayedi. Lala's work is a direct reference to the Romantics and the Orientalists, which we know as a Western art movement depicting idealized settings and stylized interpretations of a mythical Middle East. Lala takes these works and recreates these settings, but with her distinct imprint of text and pattern, which in a way reclaims these settings into the hands of the subject. Unlike the Orientalists, where the work is an entirely fantasized voyeuristic interpretation by the artist without actually allowing the subject matter any say. This work is by young Iraqi artist Haif Kahraman. When I asked Haif about pattern and design in her work, she said that the pattern-making process is the intuitive and spontaneous part of an overall studied and preconceived process of creating her work in general. These patterns remind her of her homeland. I would like to bring attention to the use of text in her work. Haif uses slang Iraqi writing, derived and influenced by folklore and childhood memories. I personally find the use of Iraqi slang instead of formal Arabic makes the work that much more relatable, personal, and endearing. Of course, I'm, again, talking from a personal perspective. Among the most beautiful examples of Islamic design are that of the ceramic art of Iznik tiles. This is a detail of the Iznik tile collection of many collections at Shangri-La. Again, repetition and symmetry is used and perfected in this floral pattern. This is an Iznik plate from the Syrian room at Shangri-La. This work is from a series called Widow Nation. It's about the mothers, wives, and sisters of those who perished in the Iraq War. I created the series in 2009. Growing up in Iraq during the Iraq-Iran War, images of mothers holding pictures of their deceased sons, husbands, and brothers were very common in Iraqi press, almost a weekly occurrence. So the central image is part of my memory and not a fictional placement. However, situating the figure in front of the ceramic floral tile that is found in the holy shrines of Iraq is a deliberate way to anchor the story by giving it a cultural reference, and more so by giving it a location. This mother is at the holy shrines praying for the soul of her child. I used symmetry and repetition and color of the Islamic design to bring further focus to the central dark figure. Here I used Michelangelo's Pieta, which has become to us modern society a universal symbol of dignified mourning. The background design pattern is inspired by ceramic tiles. Again, gives the work a cultural specificity. This work is inspired by the ordeal of a young Egyptian lady who was abused by the police during a protest in Tahrir Square in Egypt in 2011. The image of the girl being dragged by the police, exposing her blue bra, went viral on the web. Shortly after, the revolution happened in Egypt and the regime fell. Like the Widow series we just saw, placing the figure, here the iconic Nefertiti, in front of the Islamic pattern helps anchor the narrative in a cultural setting. This incident occurred in an Islamic society, in an Islamic culture, where modesty is essential. So exposing a lady's undergarment is yet an added insult to the many injuries she endured that day. Of course, the blue bra itself is here what makes the work specific. I created this work as a reaction to that story in 2012. So, in conclusion, in many cases, we saw that the contemporary art of the Middle East, even when referencing its traditional elements, is going hand in hand with the art of the West and global art. Islamic calligraphy and design in contemporary art is used in forms of abstraction, conceptualism, surrealism, and so on and so forth. Calligraphy and design in its traditional form was a deliberate way to communicate spirituality and reform. Spirituality and reform. In its contemporary setting, we see it as a vehicle to express creative individuality and identity. Also, we have seen that the themes of many contemporary Middle Eastern artworks to be that of a political and social nature. After all, artists react to their environments and their surroundings. In a region where the political and social climate is in constant shift, it's only natural that the arts reflect that climate. The decorative overtones of Islamic-inspired art might seem contradictory to the realistic political and social nature of some contemporary artworks, but it's worth noting that calligraphy and design were created as a means to accent reality and to introduce the viewer through contrast to a wider spectrum of understanding, a wider range of understanding. As we are bombarded daily with news of political unrest and religious extremism from or relating to the Middle East, it's never been more important to look into the arts and the literature of that culture. Because, in my opinion, it's only through looking at the arts and literature of a culture that we get to learn, we get to find out, and we get to see the true people's aspirations and their dreams and their hopes. I know it's easy for some to paint the Middle East with a color of suspicion. And I know it's easy for some to paint the 1.5 billion Muslims of the world today with a color of suspicion. But I also know for a fact that a culture capable of producing such beauty in the arts and the literature could not and should not be reduced to a short list of negative adjectives. I would like to thank the Honolulu Museum of Art for hosting the Shangri-La exhibit. I would like to thank the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Arts for continuing to introduce the community to Islamic art. I believe that the role of such exhibits, especially in this day and age, goes far beyond simple entertainment, because it's with such exhibits that we introduce a different facet to the stories we constantly hear from the media, which are mainly negative. And it's only through showing different facets of a story we arrive at better understanding. And I believe that that's the role of art, is to help us better understand, either by challenging what we already know or by adding to what we know. And that more understanding makes for a stronger community, either locally speaking or globally speaking. And I'd like to thank you all for sharing your Saturday with me. I really enjoyed having you here today. And I hope I didn't cause many of you to go to sleep. But I'll answer, and thank you. Thank you.